Welcome to America's Heroes Group. I'm Sean Claybon, your host. October is Breast Cancer, Mental Health, and National Disability and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is the show recorded for Wednesday, October 16, 2024. And today we have with us a very distinguished guest. We've heard him on our show before, and he's back with us today to give us some good information about some history and also some things we need to think and consider very strongly. And that is Mr. Richard Berkshire. He's the CEO of the Black Veterans Project, and that is an advocacy group and also a very important group that gives us information about history and also about our country. He's also a U.S. Army Afghanistan Infantry combat medic and co-founder of the organization. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, as always.
It's my pleasure. So again, tell us a little bit about the Black History Project, or Black Veteran Project, I should say. So the Black Veteran Project has certain goals. What is the goal of the Black Veteran Project?
So the goal of the Black Veteran, first, thanks for having me. Two, the goal of the Black Veterans Project at its core, we've been around for about 6 years, is to frame up a reparative justice effort. It's looking at the legacy of benefit obstruction that Black vets have faced historically, all the way dating back to the inception of the GI Bill, and trying to connect the historical legacy, but also start to do some actual real tangible things. So we've mostly been framing up legal pathways, so looking at how we can use litigation and help to ferment research that can help to support litigation efforts for Black vets that are seeking reparative justice. And then also doing some legislative advocacy, contending with the different facets of benefit obstruction. Mostly been focused on VA home loans with respect to our legislative advocacy, but that's essentially the project's mandate.
Now, how did you start? How did you co-found it?
So I founded it shortly after I'd gotten out the military, had a really difficult transition. I think on paper, it seemed as though, I'd done pretty well for myself. I graduated from an Ivy League school, studying public policy, got a great job in New York. But there was a bit of a mental decline. It was also at a time when Trump had just got elected. We were talking about 2016 and about. And so, I deteriorated. I just had a really difficult transition point. And I tried to seek out mental health care through the VA and was consistently kind of turned away and mismanaged. And unfortunately, that led to a suicide attempt. And it was when I survived that suicide attempt, I ended up being in a psych ward, and I read a book called When Affirmative Action Was White. And it looked at the construction of social welfare policies really following World War II under the New Deal and the GI Bill that helped to bolster and build out the white middle class, but that largely locked out Black folk. And I found particularly interesting the history in and around the GI Bill. And then I'd also have been doing a bit of research looking at racial inequities that were kind of persisting in the present day. I was living in New York City, and it just struck me that when I would go to events for unemployed veterans, for instance, the vast majority of the room would be Black. And so I knew that there were issues that were still persisting, but I didn't have a good sense of what the VA was doing about that, about those inequities, but also kind of how my generation could plug into kind of the intergenerational struggle. And so we really started as a storytelling project and kind of a research project. And our first major partnership was with Yale Law School, who we still work very closely with. They have a veterans legal clinic that does some really robust litigation work. And so we ended up partnering together on a FOIA effort that looked at disparities in disability compensation over the last 20 years. So from about 2001 to about 2020, 2021. And we were able to show that there were, in fact, significant and sustained racial disparities with respect to disability compensation, and one explicitly around PTSD. And so that, confirmed what Black vets had long known. I don't think that this is any news to Black vets, but what made it special was that we actually had internal VA data for the first time in history proving what they had long suspected. And so now we can actually do something with it, not only on the advocacy side, but through litigation. And so that data is undergirding a landmark case called Monk versus United States, which has been making its way through the courts for about 2 years now. Back in March or late March, early April, it became one of the first reparations or reparative justice cases in the nation's history to survive a motion to dismiss, meaning that it's going to hopefully be heard on its merits in court. In part, I think the most convincing evidence for the court was that we had all this internal VA data specifically around disability compensation. So we kind of found the smoking gun in some instance. But like you said, we know that this history has been going on for a long time, stripping tens of billions of dollars out of the support apparatus that should be there to help to undergird anyone who serves, right? Those who serve honorably. And dating all the way back to the GI Bill, whether it be through housing loans, through disability compensation, through equitable access to a host of other programs. Black vets have been marginalized, and our group has been trying to see how we can force the VA to make some kind of recompense for it that goes beyond just saying that we're going to try to institute some kind of factors that make racial equity more real in the future without contending with the harm that's already been done.
Wouldn't it also bring some history and recognition to the experience of not just Blacks, but Native Americans, Jews in the military, Latinos in the military, taking us all the way back to Crispus Attucks, who was the first person to die during the American Revolution. And we've always had a history of being at forefront and being and having military service. The Harlem Hellfighters during World War I, that was the Army National Guard unit in your neck of the woods in New York. They were one of the most decorated units, 170 decorations, and particularly there was a member who historians know about very well, a Private Henry Johnson, who single-handedly fended off 30 Germans with a bolo knife. And even though he got wounded, he was never even awarded the Purple Heart. To give people context, people get the Purple Heart for getting shot in the butt, for falling on the knife, or for doing all kinds of different things. He fended off 30 attacking enemy combatants, was wounded 21 times, never got disability, and never even got a Purple Heart. Now the French, where who witnesses his heroism and bravery, awarded him with the Croix de Guerre and with a star and a bronze palm. Now the bronze palm is important because that bronze palm is the highest, makes that award the highest level of that award that you can receive, and it's like the second highest award that you can receive in the French military. But he was awarded an American. He was actually the first American to be awarded that award. But what nation awards a foreign co-combatant a medal like that? He didn't even get a medal, Purple Heart, not even what he deserved, until he got after he died. Eventually, it took him years to get it, and for him to actually be posthumously awarded this award, the Medal of Honor, which he truly deserved. So those types of histories, when I think about that, it kind of lays a groundwork and a foundation that they try to understand, even though the military was one of the first federal institutions, and really the first institutions in the United States to really integrate because of necessity. But you're fighting war, you need everything you got, right? You need every resource you can possibly, every stone needs to be unturned in order to it has to be turned over in order to find all the resources you can get, right? How does that lean into and to give people some perspective of what are the types of injustices that minorities faced from military benefits, receiving your benefits needs to recognition?
Yeah, I think it's multi-layered. I think in part of, again, our work has been to try to tie the historical thread to the present day. I think, when our country talks about the issue of reparations or restorative justice, a lot of folks go directly to slavery. And I, deeply believe, and I think there are a lot of others that deeply believe that Jim Crow era policies are where the conversation should really begin. And that's the most fertile ground for a reparative mandate at the national level. And so, to even talk about, I think even more present days, disparities that I think are part and parcel to the legacy of how race has played out. Black service members even today are over twice as likely, depending on their branch of service, to get out with a dishonorable discharge. And some folks, they have a host of different reasons why that is. But it's still, I think, quite alarming. And when you have a dearth of Black folks serving in the officer rank or in the special forces or in, all the different opportunities that the military can bring, and Black folk are still finding it very difficult to traverse that landscape. And I don't often find that there are organizations willing to contend with that and have a more serious conversation. And so in our small way, we're a grassroots organization, so we punch above our weight class, but we try to insert that conversation into the ecosystem to ensure that race is being talked about in a constructive way. But then you also have, I came on to talk about an event that we're having on the 25th of October, our first equity reception here in DC, where we put together a pretty distinguished panel of folks who'll be, talking walking through a lot of this history. One of the folks will also be from the Maryland ACLU. They've been doing a bit of work around what's been happening relative to affirmative action at the military academies and the ways in which that, these programs that were instituted mostly in the 1970s and 80s that allowed for, for us to get to a point where we have, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense be Black men, in part because they were beneficiaries of these programs. And now there's a concerted effort to deconstruct these programs within the military, let alone everything that happened, this misnomers in the last 2 years around critical race theory and the way that they were attacking the way history was being taught around race at the academies or at military institutions. You have a racial climate survey that's done every 2 years by the DOD, and it never sees the light of day. And we don't talk about these things. We act like it's normal. There's a sustained disparity in government contracting where Black folks and Black businesses receive less than 1% of DoD contracts, and the ways in which that translates to massive wealth disparities on the other side is not discussed. And that's not, that people don't draw the correlations as much. And I think that, obviously our project is focused explicitly on VA benefits. So everything from VA home loans to disability compensation has kind of been our sweet spot, and trying to figure out where we can do some valuable work in partnership with attorneys and with researchers to move conversations forward about remedy. Ultimately, we can't have a holistic conversation without also touching on these other prongs that over the course of many decades have siphoned quite literally hundreds of billions of dollars out of our community.
It's interesting because when I think about our history in the military, and also how just looking at the foundation, the fact that Blacks in the military and minorities in general didn't even get the recognition they deserved during wartime. And then now you fast forward to our day and time, and you see a lot of the disparities when it comes to even benefits, the benefits that these people never had a chance to enjoy. Being denied access to the GI Bill, being denied access to the VA home loan guarantees, things like that, which had a huge impact on how wealth is transferred and how people can actually build a better life for themselves, for their families, and for their future, and transfer wealth. How is your strategy? How do you see your strategy as just attacking individuals? Seems like you're taking on individual cases. What efforts are being done to try to look at changing the actual policy itself, the policies themselves, to kind of deconstruct these inequities?
I don't think we've gotten there just yet. I mean, I think that our FOIA efforts forced the VA to have to be honest about the disparities that existed and forced their hand around releasing reports that they had long buried for many years. And I think that was a win within itself as a starting point. The VA put together an equity task force so that this administration has been somewhat supportive of the efforts to address racial inequities. But it's not very clear what policies they're putting in place when they're still trying to get the Monk case thrown out of court. There's still not full transparency around kind of state-based or even like by hospitals or by regions of the VA where this might be most concentrated and denials might be most concentrated. Like, we know that the VA has been tracking these issues in some way, but it's been very slow to task to try to get them to be fully transparent about the data that they do have, and then start to figure out how we take action steps to ensure that, one, bad actors are addressed, because it seems as though the VA has known who the bad actors are for some time, but have been in some respects protecting them. But then two, I think it's also a conversation about the way in which the VA funnels resources toward organizations that serve minority groups, right? I think that there are many VSOs that have been carrying the brunt of these disparities and servicing in community and providing direct service to Black vets that have been falling through the cracks for many, many decades. I can name quite a few organizations that have been doing that, but they are severely under-resourced, right? And oftentimes pale in comparison to the kind of support that, even outside of the government, the kind of corporate support rather, that like an organization like the Wounded Warrior Project might receive. But these organizations often have very wide racial blind spots. And I don't think that's, I don't think that's I think that's an uncomfortable truth that we need to speak out loud. The ways in which, organizations like the American Legion or the VFW or these kind of main pillars in the VSO space had largely neglected their responsibility to also focus on the ways in which race has shaped America, and race was shaping the ways in which veterans benefits were being distributed. And so it's a broader conversation. I don't think that there's just like one kind of blanket solution that the VA can necessarily institute. It's about how the ecosystem works in tandem to ensure that benefits are distributed in an equitable way.
So what do you see at the future? What's your next step as far as trying to advance your mission and your goals to try to tackle this problem?
Yeah, so I mean, building out a reparative justice project takes a long time. So we actually took a real step back in the last year to think about strategy. We ended up moving through a really robust strategic planning process, have instituted some new really exciting partnerships, some of which we'll be naming out loud at the equity reception. So I'm not going to give them away now, but we're continuing to build out and bolster our kind of research partnerships, thinking through how do we really approach the legislative repair. So, about 4 years ago, there was that initial introduction of a bill called the GI Bill Restoration Act, which would seek to give descendants of Black World War II veterans access to VA home loans and potentially education benefits. And that bill stalled and didn't go anywhere. There was this kind of iterative bill that looked at the legacy of VA home loan denials explicitly, called the VA Housing Loan Forever Act, of which I testified in front of Congress twice about, but it was draft legislation that was never formally introduced. And so there's this need really to actually draft some piece of coherent legislation with a strategy and a funding model attached to it that we can actually see through. And so that's going to be one of our bigger kind of plans of attack in the coming administration. I think second to that, our main focus is on litigation. The Monk case, and it's a landmark case, so I should emphasize the importance of the Monk case. The Monk case is as important to the Black veteran community as Brown v. Board is and should be to anybody who cares about Black folk and education. That's how consequential the Monk case is, in part because it will determine in court whether the VA can ever be held accountable for historical racial discrimination against Black veterans. So it's not when I say the importance of Black vets, but any vet who cares about racial equity, to really pay attention to this case and to support it as it moves forward. I think I can't understate that. And it's also going to be an opportunity for us to extrapolate from the VA a lot of the things that they've been hiding over the decades, hopefully in court in some way. So Yale is leading that work, and I'm really excited. Next week, I'll be able to be on the law school's campus, talking to some of the students that are working on this, and continuing to build solidarity. But then also, with respect to solidarity, the reparations ecosystem is vast. And so we do a lot of work trying to build solidarity amongst other kinds of movements around reparative justice. But our eyes on litigation, we definitely think that litigation, there are other kinds of lawsuits that we're seeking to take part in supporting. And so some of the new partnerships that we have will be in and around standing those up. And continuing to advance research. And by research, I think part of that is collecting narratives. We've been doing this for about 6 years, and so you named some of the venerated Tuskegee Airmen or the troops that we all know too well, and knowing about that is deeply important. But I think we've also kind of forgotten that we have to preserve the stories of a lot of these veterans that didn't get access to their benefits, because that history is going to be so easily lost if we don't. And the time to do it is now. We've almost fully lost the World War II generation. We're going quickly into the Vietnam era now, and the need to make sure that we're collecting the narrative, specifically of the folks that stand up to be litigants in these cases, I think is a really important opportunity for us to narrative build for the public so they can understand the interconnectivity of this struggle for veterans benefits and what it means by way of, trying to actualize some kind of reparative mandate. So litigation, trying to get more organized on how we approach legislative repair, and continuing to build community amongst other Black veterans who are interested in this work that I think is always top of mind too.
It's kind of gut-wrenching to me because working in the fields that I kind of touch in my everyday life, people that have put their lives on the line and have done amazing things in the military throughout World War I, World War II, Vietnam. I mean, I'm thinking about Dory Miller and how he was, he did receive the Navy Cross, but his captain, who he helped save, helped protect, even though he eventually died of his wounds, gets Medal of Honor. And we're fighting, we have VFW and American Legion chapters trying to fight for Dory Miller's Medal of Honor today.
Mm-hmm. Historically Black ones, because they were segregated at one point.
Exactly. And then in World War II, nobody got a Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
I mean, it took 30 years for presidents to go back and say, hey, you know, these people deserve their recognition, and these people, you know, deserve to be honored. You know, I mean, so those types of things I think are I think important for people to get a kind of a perspective as to if those types of ideas and that type of discrimination existed in the service. What do you think would follow them when they got back home?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people being told to take off their uniform. Byron Stevenson, he's with the Equal Justice Initiative. He explained in a few documentaries and also in some of the stuff he's written, how Black veterans were told in the South to take off the uniform when they were standing at bus stops and train stations because they were offended by the fact that, you know, these guys came home and they had a military uniform on, and they were sometimes lynched. Like 10 of the 22 or 30 people that were lynched during before 1940, 10 of them were Black veterans.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, these types of things that, you know, that exist, they kind of give you perspective. But then when I think about what's going on today, you have, for example, in the education space, affirmative action was taken out of the process for admitting students to colleges. Do you think some of that type of ideology or that type of ideas that affirmative action is now no longer needed? Is that kind of filtering into the military culture or the military leadership?
Well, I mean, certainly there are folks that believe it shouldn't exist. Otherwise, the case by Ed Bloom to try to deconstruct it wouldn't be happening. But I do think that it's necessary. I mean, the disparities that exist still, even in the kinds of the number of students that are able to matriculate at schools like West Point and Annapolis, or the Naval Academy rather, are pretty disappointing. But listen, the military's always had a race problem. I don't think they've ever necessarily solved it. I think they just got good at PR under certain administrations. And I think that there's always going to be that tension. I think there are a lot of well-meaning actors, and certainly the military has diversified, and there are real strong efforts to try to make sure that the military reflects the broad stripes of our society in an equal way, and that there, you know, is equal opportunity in that ecosystem. But by and large, still white straight men are the ones that are most afforded opportunity in that apparatus. And there's still much work to be done to ensure that that racism or that homophobia, that sexism, that xenophobia isn't rampant in the ranks. And I'm not an expert on the DoD. I served, for 7 years as a combat medic, so I pull a lot from my own personal experience. But this work has been mostly focused on the VA, right? And once you get out and you take off that uniform, you should be, in so long as you serve honorably and honestly, we get into a whole conversation about whether or not folks with dishonorable discharges should be able to have access to basic care at the VA. I think that they should. But I think that, ultimately, if you served our country, you should be able to gain access to the benefits of that service. And historically, Black vets have not. And that needs to be contended with if we're going to have a serious conversation about how we move our country forward across racial lines, and try to tackle the kind of vestiges of economic inequality and where they were birthed from.
I think that's really profound statements. I think as long as you start keeping those cases coming, like the Monk case, and also changing the public perception by letting people understand the history of Black service in America, not just, like you said, not just Blacks, but the LGBTQ community, Jews, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, all the people that have gone through the ranks and have done amazing things in the military.
Yeah.
And
we'll continue to do amazing things.
Exactly. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you. We got to have you back to kind of give us more information and kind of give us some updates on what types of things you've accomplished, because we want to see this ball moving forward, and we want to get some more cases out there to correct some of the inequities that happened in the past. Because once again, to sum it all up, people served in the military, deserved their benefits, and did not get them, or were denied them, or were delayed them. And that's the problem. And then those things have long-term effects in future generations.
Absolutely.
So we need to go back and fix those things, because there's families today that suffer or are not where they're supposed to be, and communities that aren't where they're supposed to be because they didn't get that injection of support that a lot of other communities did benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Richard Berkshire. He is with the the Black Veterans Project, and he is going to do some great things going forward. Want to hear about that, but make sure you go to our website, americashg.org. That's americashg.org, and give us some comments on what you think about this, and also give us some comments about shows you want to hear in the future. Like and subscribe. This is America's Heroes Group. Sean Claybon. Be back soon.